go. Can I start first by going around the room? I'll ask Bob, Tim, and April what your current job role is. Bob, what do you do at CAT? What do you do?
So my name is Bob Allen. I'm a manager of manufacturing engineering in our machine shop here at Caterpillar, and I've been here almost 3 years.
Thanks, Bob. And what do you do, Tim?
Currently section manager at Caterpillar. I've been at CAT for 17 years, and I'm getting ready to take on a new role as factory manager.
Awesome promotion, Tim.
Thank you, sir.
And what do you do, April?
Hello, I'm a materials supervisor at Wabash. I've been at Wabash for 12 years and then in my current position for a little over 2.
Thank you. I will go ahead. Me and Michael have gotten 10 questions together, and I'll just go around the room. I'll ask the question, then I'll just go around the room, and if you could please answer it for us, we would be very appreciative. The first question is, there are 3 stages of conflict: routine, daily events. These are the normal daily bumps. 2 employees are in a lively debate, but are working towards a solution. At this stage, you would just monitor the situation. The next stage is evolving conflicts. This is the stage where the games begin, avoiding one another and talking behind each other's backs. At this stage is where you would step in and keep it from escalating. The last stage is called the deeper conflicts. All meaningful conversations between the 2 parties have broken down. Your ability to handle these conflicts depends on your knowledge. Some of these situations might require a more experienced supervisor or an HR representative. The question is, have you ever had a situation where you needed to get someone else's help? If so, what did you learn from that experience that you were able to handle the next situation that arose? Bob, did you answer that?
Yep. So before Caterpillar, I've been in manufacturing for over 25 years, and some of that, April, was at Wabash. And if we have time at the end, I was going to ask you about that. So early in my career, I worked at Ford, and I had in a superintendent's role. So I had production supervisors that reported to me, and one of those supervisor direct reports didn't like to come back from lunch all the time. And that caused an issue, as you might imagine. So in addressing that, trying to correct it one-on-one, I met a lot of resistance from that person, and I had to go to HR. I had to escalate it to HR for resolution. And unfortunately, what seemed to be a pretty simple behavioral issue didn't appear to be simple from the supervisor's perspective. So we wound up getting to the point where we terminated that person, and that was HR who helped me work through all of that. But it was pretty tense at times. Glad I had HR around at that time.
Thank you, Bob. April,
Sure.
do you have a answer?
Yes, I do. When I first became a supervisor, I often sought out the guidance from a lot of the more senior supervisors. I had an employee that appeared to be under the influence of some form of substance. And I wasn't quite sure how I was supposed to handle that because I didn't want to seem like I was being judgmental or anything. So I went to a more senior supervisor and just asked for them to observe the employee as well. And they also found that they thought they might be under the influence of like a substance. So we ended up taking the employee to medical, and they were in fact under the influence. And then after the situation, the supervisor just kind of talked to me and was like, of course we don't want to jump to any conclusions. So it is best to, get multiple people and like get their opinion before we make essentially an accusation like that. So then the next time I felt a lot more comfortable handling the situation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Tim, did you have a situation?
Yes, sir. So, coming into management, I was on an off shift, so everybody's experienced that before. You have less support. I had a female employee that was trying to get some overtime, uh, early over shift coverage, and a day shift leader who just kept turning her down for the overtime. So this led this technician basically to hit on some keywords, and I'll explain that a little bit. But excuse me. She felt like she was being harassed or singled out, and those are the key words that she used in coming to me with concern over why she wasn't getting this overtime opportunity. So as you can imagine, being a new leader, I was pretty scared. Uh, Unfortunately, I had to wait till morning to involve our HR team, and I got a pretty lengthy lesson in key words that we need to take very seriously from a leader's standpoint as far as documentation and definitely resolution. So that definitely helped me learn how to handle that on my own going forward. But as a new supervisor, a new leader, that one scared me a little.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you for being open. The next question I have is, early in the book, it discusses how conflict can either be viewed negatively or as opportunities for positive change through addressing a situation, but in fact are neither good nor bad. An individual's perspective on the conflict dictates whether it will result negatively or positively. Early in my career in management, I viewed conflicts negatively and seek only to reach my desired outcome regardless of the impact. But as I have gained more experience, I have learned that if I manage correctly, conflicts allow the opportunity for those involved to gain a better understanding of each other, the situation, and even themselves. Have you had a similar experience? If so, how have you changed your approach when addressing conflicts? Bob?
Yeah, this one took me back to a class that I had in Chicago a few years ago on negotiating, and it was more commercial negotiating oriented, but it really stressed trying to understand the desired outcome for each side of the disagreement or the conflict. And the example that it made me think of was when I was a quality manager with a company called Borg Warner in the past. We had a warranty issue with Volkswagen, which was a customer in Mexico. So I had to travel to Mexico for this a couple of times. And our component was mounted on the engine on one vehicle and then mounted under the engine on another. And in the mounting on the under the vehicle, there were a lot of warranty claims for water related issues. And their outcome was they wanted the warranty claims to stop, and our outcome was we wanted our warranty claim money back and then find a resolution to the what became an engineering problem, really based on where the part was located and how it was protected from water in particular. So I was able to negotiate with them and get our warranty money back, and at the same time we fixed the problem so that our component could live in both those conditions. But that was really tense at times. But once we got to kind of a common ground, then we were able to work towards a resolution more easily. And of course, being outnumbered in Mexico with a lot of customer folks around, there were only two of us, and a whole factory of them, about 10 people in the negotiating part. That was a fun challenge at the time.
Thank you, Bob. April, did you have an answer for this?
Yeah, with the role I'm in, I typically deal like conflict that I deal with will be either between myself and an employee or between two employees. So I think about one conflict that I dealt with between two employees. They both performed the same job and often had to work together, but for some reason they couldn't get along. And upon discussing with the employees, one employee felt like they contributed more than the other employee. But it turned out they didn't fully understand what the other employee did because they had to load flats as well as pull material from the line. And the other employee just was pulling material from the line and delivering it to the line. So the job function of loading a flat took up more time than just dropping at the line. So once the two employees kind of fully understood the scope of each other's jobs, they were able to work better together and even started helping each other out more. So one person wanted, I guess, the other person to perform more, but just didn't understand. So in a sense, the interests of both parties were met because they were able to better understand what each other did.
Thank you, April. Tim, you want to answer this?
Yeah, I think I've got an example. So I had a couple technicians. One I worked with for a lot of years on day shift. And when I went back to third shift to be a leader, I ended up inheriting the other. Well, these two had they ran the same operation, just on different shifts. Years of back and forth. I mean, shenanigans, vandalizing each other's toolboxes. I mean, you name it, these two took part in it. As I came to day shift, both of these individuals bid on a leadership role and were awarded the job. So I had a great relationship with both of them, but neither one of them could stand each other. So I had to sit down basically and do a conflict resolution with both of them at the same time, with my expectations as their leader of what needed to happen. And through that conversation, there was a lot of things like that she just spoke of, like they realized what it all started with was one felt they were doing more than the other, and the other one was just goofing off. But then they realized there was other roles and responsibilities on different shifts. And I think today these two are still working together side by side very well. It was an awesome move to get them both there, and it worked out.
Thanks, Tim. The next question I have, we have a power-based approach. This usually depends on who has the most power. There is a rights-based approach. This depends on rules, policies, procedures from which parties can make a claim to procedural fairness. And we have interest-based approaches. This is where each party attempts to understand each other's interest and find a solution that is beneficial to both. Which one of these approaches do you find yourself using the most? Bob?
Yeah, the interest-based approach is the one I find that I use the most. Going back to the comment I made before, when you can establish the common ground, common interest in this case, then you can kind of rally around that and try to make it as much of a win-win as possible.
Thank you. April?
I would definitely say that I use the interest-based approach a lot more. Again, in the role I'm in, I deal with a lot of, base level employees. And they just want to feel like, I matter and what I do matters. So I definitely try to make sure that they feel like, even a thank you or anything where they feel like their contributions make a difference.
Thank you. Tim?
I would say that I use the rights-based approach more. With a more mature team being on days, I think it depends a lot on the rules, policy, procedure, that kind of stuff tends to come into play more than an interest-based approach. I can say with a younger team, I could definitely see where the interest base would come in a whole lot heavier.
Thanks, Tim. The next question I have, understanding that conflicts can occur over a wide variety of reasons, whether it's personal issues, disagreement with processes, overall structure, lack of communication, etc. Being able to identify the triggers to these conflicts allows you the opportunity to address the issue in the early stages before it can escalate. In your experience, what have been the most common reasons for conflicts to trigger, and how have you been able to successfully identify and resolve them? Bob?
Well, I go back to earlier in my career when I was a supervisor. Well, and recently too. Tim probably chuckles at that, joining Caterpillar, but working with hourly technicians directly, a lot of external inputs or circumstances really cause a lot of stress in the workplace. When the issues happening at home and they bring them into work, and some of them are tough, so it's hard to have a clean break when you come to work. But those external inputs can really be impactful in those situations, and usually, especially if someone that you know a little bit, their behavior changes a little bit, then it's a good opportunity to ask, hey, what's going on? What's got you agitated? And you try to use choice words, right? Because you're not trying to escalate things, but asking what's going on, and giving them a chance to talk about what's going on outside gives them a chance to vent, and then you can kind of get back to the issue at hand. And usually it's not such a big issue anymore once you can diffuse some of it. That's been my experience.
Thanks, Bob. What about you, April?
I think I'd have to completely agree with Bob. I've seen it more often where, I approach an employee who's been struggling and it's like, hey man, what's going on? What's up? Like, I noticed that this is happening, and they'll be like, oh, I'm so stressed out because of this reason or that. And I think, again, I'll agree with Bob that it's important to give them the chance to tell you what's going on if that's what they choose, before then going into addressing the issue. If you just go straight to the issue, they're going to feel like you don't care. But more often than not, I think it's external, what I've experienced with conflict inside the workplace.
Thank you. And you, Tim?
I'd agree 100% with both of their examples of just the outside noise. But I'd like to add basically the communication. That seems to be a big one at Caterpillar. Whether we like it or not, managers, whether you're entry level all the way to the top, have different understandings of the why behind the way we run our business and the decisions we make. Sometimes, as Bob can attest, it's very hard to be able to explain to a technician so they can understand that. So I think that drives some feelings too, like they're not being shared with, like they're not getting all the details to why we're doing things. And sometimes you just flat out can't. So as a leader, you definitely have to come up with ways to try to explain things in a manner that they'll understand. Obviously, we sit in meetings talking about OPEC and all that. That's not technician level. So I think a lot of times the frustration comes from communication inside and what we're able to tell them. And then how good are you of a manager to be able to explain it on a level they can understand it to keep them informed.
Thanks, Tim. The next question I have, anger is our own. Others don't make us angry. We make ourselves angry. As our book says, a person may do something that makes us angry, but anger, like any other emotion, is our responsibility. When our anger gets going, our logic goes out the window. How do you eliminate your anger or get it under control during a heated conversation? Bob?
Yeah, I go back to de-escalating, trying to de-escalate the energy and in whatever the issue is. And sometimes that's for clarity, you know, of what the issue is or the real issue. But there have been times when, and I'd say earlier on in my career as well, that, you know, it's just like, hey, you know, this is getting a little elevated. I think we need to take a break and walk away for a minute and then, you know, come back, you know, give it an hour or maybe if this is in the morning, hey, let's get back together after lunch and let things calm down a little bit.
Thank you. April?
I would definitely say if it's not possible to de-escalate the situation and I feel it's necessary, I will let the person know, like, hey, I think we need to take a break from this conversation. Maybe depending on who the conflict is with, if it's with maybe another supervisor, it's like, well, let's set up a meeting so we can talk about this more in depth. That way it's also in like a neutral environment and you don't want to have conflict like out in the open. So sometimes it is best to just say, hey, let's talk about this here in a little bit. You know, maybe let's meet in a more private location and then resume the conversation. It gives me a chance to chill out and collect my thoughts before resuming the conversation.
Thank you. I like how you brought up the neutral ground. Tim?
So obviously we have a values and action program that we go by, that it kind of dictates how we're able to talk to each other and how we should treat each other all the time. Now we talked about earlier with outside noise coming in, when it seems that I can't get to a resolution or even a common ground, I've stated more than once, hey, look, let's let this go. You go back, do your thing, I'll do my thing. And let's meet up maybe later on this afternoon or tomorrow morning. Let's talk through it at that point, right? We're both cooler heads, more likely to get to a point of, hey man, I overreacted here. I didn't handle that the way I should have. And then you can actually get to some sort of resolution. Because I think otherwise all you're doing is feeding the flames.
Interesting. Thanks, Tim.
Hey, a quick comment, Mike,
Yeah.
on what Tim said too.
Yeah, Bob.
Tim's probably experienced this, maybe April, but you know, when you come back later, you oftentimes I'd say those parties will say, hey man, I'm sorry, I was so upset earlier. I don't know why I let that get to me. And then they have a clear mind to get to whatever the real issue is too. So almost like the time delay helps take care of it a little bit.
Absolutely. The time to think about it, you cool off and you're like, whoa, man, I was way out of line there. And I've been on both sides of that, right? I've definitely lost my cool as a leader and had to go back and apologize. And then I've been on the other side where I'm like, you know, we have way too much respect for each other to treat each other like this. We obviously are on two different books. We're not even on the same page, you know? So let's let this ride and then come back around and talk about it. And like you said, 8, 9, 10 times out of 10, they're going to start off with, man, I was way out of line there, you know, and that respect comes back at that point.
Thanks, everyone. Next question I have. In the book, two main types of negotiation methods are discussed, which are the distributive method and the integrative method. Distributive negotiation is designed around the concept of a win-lose situation for those involved. Integrative negotiation is designed around the concept that the parties involved are more open to compromise in order to achieve a solution that satisfies both involved. Do you use both versions of negotiating in your position? If so, in which situations do you find each one to be the most effective? Bob?
Very rarely to use the distributive anymore. Really going back to preferring the integrative method and going back to really what's the common goal here, and keep it in a professional environment, and what's the best outcome, not at the expense of the other party.
Thanks, Bob. April?
Excuse me, sorry. Yeah, I think that you want to definitely avoid trying to have a win-lose situation. I was trying to think of an example of where it's been win or lose. Essentially, I might have a situation where an employee loses if they did a policy violation or something like that and was written up or let go, but I don't necessarily win. So I don't feel like that's like a win-lose. I think it's best to try to solve conflict where both parties win, or essentially nobody loses, at least. You end up, if an employee feels like they lost against you, then they're gonna not have as much, rapport with you or respect for you. So I think it's always best to try to have where nobody's losing, essentially.
Thank you, April. Thank you. Tim?
I would agree. The integrative negotiation is gives you that opportunity again to try to reach, both parties if you're not one of the parties involved in the conflict. But it gives you an opportunity to lead, right? And by lead, I mean explain the who, what, why, when, where, the overall goal, and how we win as a team by achieving the overall goal, as opposed to a win-lose situation. Now, as April stated, policy-wise, that there's no way around that. But outside of policy, integrative is definitely the way I would go.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks. The next question I have, Thomas Kilman has a 5-strategy approach for handling conflict. There is avoiding. You avoid the situation. This works for issues that the person knows will disappear through inattention. The person will forget about it over time. The next is accommodating. This is one party will concede their interest and let the other party win. Sometimes this is due to the fact that they were wrong, or they want to demonstrate that they are reasonable and open-minded. The next is competing. This person would be willing to fight for a principle at any cost, and does not care what the other party wants. The next is compromising. This is where both parties will make a compromise to help solve the issue. The final one is collaborating. This one is the most beneficial, but also takes the most time. This is a problem-solving approach. Want to seek the best outcome that is mutually beneficial. We use all these strategies depending on the situation. Which one of these is your normal go-to strategy, and why is it your normal go-to? Bob?
Well, I'm going to jump ahead to I found the conflict management questionnaire that you mentioned at the end of the attachment, and
Yeah.
collaborating came up as my number one. So that's the one that is my go-to most often, just because it's like it says, it takes a lot of time sometimes, but I find that that's usually the best outcome if you have the time to go through that process.
Okay. April?
Again, I like if you have the time for it, the collaborating is gonna give the best desired outcome. Part of what my like job role is I'm over the continuous improvement of the warehouse. So a big core part of my job is to collaborate and come up with solutions, and that oftentimes involves me working with a handful of different supervisors, employees. They may have different views than each other, so then that's where I come into play, where I try to get each party to see each other's point of view, and then try to be neutral as well and explain the benefits of, okay, if we do it this way or do it that way, and then essentially try to get them to agree. So yeah, it is a timely process, but it's the most desired way to handle it.
Thanks. Tim?
I would definitely go with collaborating. Basically, I kind of see accommodating and compromising as a Band-Aid almost, if that makes sense. Uh, it's going to get you through, the next day, week, month, but collaborating is the problem solving approach. And that's how you're going to get to a permanent corrective action versus a Band-Aid or an understanding to agree to disagree, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Thanks, Tim. Next question I have. The 3 channels of communication discussed in this course are nonverbal, facial expression and gestures, verbal, literal words being spoken, and the paraverbal, pitch, tone, pace, and inflection used. Which of these channels of communication has the greatest impact on the results when attempting to resolve a conflict, and why? Bob?
I had down the verbal stuff's pretty direct, but in a conflict, especially going back to when I was a supervisor, the nonverbal really tells a lot. And the paraverbal, I hadn't heard of that before this information you sent out. So I thought that was interesting, but that nonverbal first, I would say, and then the paraverbal is kind of second behind. It's like, you really pick up the attitude, I guess, of what's behind it.
Thanks, Bob. April?
I had also never heard the paraverbal before. For me, yeah, it's your body language, your tone of voice. I can say, oh, I agree with what you're saying. If I have an attitude in my voice or I'm rolling my eyes, obviously I don't agree with what you're saying. So I think it's definitely the body context and tone that is a important factor.
Thank you. Tim?
So I'm going to throw an answer at you and you tell me if I cover what you're after. So nonverbal to me would have the greatest impact, your facial expressions and stuff while trying to resolve a conflict. So you're either annoyed or visibly angry, or they've already depicted that you came to a place in your mind by how you look. Does that make sense? So verbal is the best in my experience, I guess in my toolbox, simply because I can leave all emotion out of it and just say, this is the way we're going to do this. And if it's a policy, obvious reasons are stated. And if it's a direction, just daily direction, it's, always try to take the time to explain to members of the team to why we're driving, not just, yell my directions from my podium and then stand there and watch. So the verbal is big because you can put so much more into it, and it'll help you a whole lot more. I think the nonverbal can definitely take you backwards if you're showing signs of being annoyed and so on and so forth. Does that make any sense, Mike?
Unfortunately, yes, that made perfect sense, Tim. Thank you, Tim.
Yes, sir.
The next question I have, there are 6 steps for conflict resolution through supportive confrontation. I will be focusing on the 3rd step, which is to select an alternative to follow. This is where someone's behavior or situation causes you a problem. Then you have 3 choices. You can change your attitude, you can change your environment, you can switch departments, or you can confront the person about the behavior. Tell me about a time when you had to do one of these. Me personally, I had to change my attitude once. We were able to work 7 days a week, 12-hour days if we wanted. Business went down, so overtime was cut off. I had a real problem with losing the overtime. I'm getting angry all the time. However, I learned that it's gone. There's nothing I can do about it. So I decided to change my attitude. I decided to think of it that, hey, this is a good thing. Now I can spend more time with my family. Bob, do you have one of these situations?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite stories. So let me take you back to the 90s when I started as a supervisor for it. And I was young Bob, and there was an old Bob. This was on the afternoon shift, and this guy had been around a long time, and he was part of the crew. And I was fresh meat for the crew, just out of school, and this young punk kid that they were going to have some fun with. So anyway, they rode me like you would ride something, you know. Anyway, they just got a lot of fun out of me, and old Bob was supposed to be my mentor, and he was just setting me up left and right, and I was seeing through it and trying to learn at the same time. And one night I just said, you know what, Bob, I really don't appreciate how you treat me, and I just wanted to share, how I was feeling. And I said it about like that. I tried to be really polite, and he smoked a cigar, and he pulled the cigar out of his mouth. He said, you know what? He goes, I don't give a, and then you can guess the rest. And I said, you know what, Bob? I thought you would say that, and I don't give a, back to him, And then the next day, that's like, they found my limit, and then I was, come on, young Bob, let me show you. I was their little buddy all of a sudden because I pushed back, and it's pretty entertaining to think back at that time, but especially Tim, in the environment we have, it was just a crazy time by comparison. But that's my I confronted it story.
Thanks, Bob. April, do you have one?
Yeah, for this situation, or for this question, I think it's important to mention that avoidance or changing departments usually isn't going to solve the problem. For me, I had an issue with, and this was actually before I was the leader, but it is something that I use as a leader. But I had a supervisor who she just didn't care for me for whatever reason, so she would always give me crap and try to get me in trouble or whatever. And for a long time, I just ignored it. And I was like, she's just whatever. And then finally one day, I set up a meeting with her, and I sat down with her at the meeting. And I didn't try to be sneaky, like, and set her up or anything. I told her, I was like, we need to meet to discuss whatever issues are between us so we're able to work together and have a positive working relationship. So she accepted the meeting, to my surprise. And we sat down, and I just was like, hey, this is how you make me feel, and this is why. And she was like, oh, that's not my intention to make you feel like that. I'm hard on you because I see that you have potential. And I was like, oh, well, you could just say that. But I definitely think that confronting it was the best thing I could have done, because I avoided it for too long, and it was a very stressful situation for myself to be in.
I'm glad it worked out. Tim, do you have one?
Yeah, I'll go the same path, just making sure you confront it. So my scenario is actually pretty recent. Had a contract worker who, for whatever reason, was afraid to talk to me, but was not shy about telling their peers that she didn't like me. And I, to this day, can't figure out what I had done or what type of vibe I have given off to where she would not like me. But she would go to her peers and talk about how much she just does not like me, how I give my lineup, how I run the line. I mean, you name it, and I heard it from 6 to 7 different people. So obviously, Mike knows my personality, even so does Bob. I went to this individual and was like, look, you get some time. I'd like to sit down and talk. Obviously, you don't have to. You do work for, the contract agency. But I would really like to talk to you. There seems to be a disconnect. So she did come to my office, made that time, and I just put it out there, everything from, I'm asked about hiring potential candidates to a full-time role. And I thought we had this relationship. I thought everything was fine, but yet you're going to your peers and you're talking about how much you dislike me and are afraid to confront me about things. And I'm like, my door is always open. I had to go through all of that with this individual. At the end of it, I can't say that I felt warm and fuzzy about where we were at, just simply because I know the talking about the dislike for me has continued. So I really can't put my finger on what I have done to make this individual feel this way. But I think it's important to at least get out there what issues you have, get them out and talk about them.
Sorry that happened to you, Tim. And the last question I have, the conflict capability questionnaire is a short assignment that allows you to grade your abilities to address conflict as well as project the score for the other party involved. Based on this questionnaire, what would you anticipate your skill level would be? What are your strengths, and where can you look to improve? Bob?
Yeah, I took the survey, and collaborating came out to be number one. And I was a little surprised competing was second, and then avoiding, accommodating, and compromising were kind of like a three-way tie with 5 or 6 points each. But I thought that was pretty consistent look at how I addressed the other items in the paper. So I felt pretty good about that.
Thank you, Bob. April?
I will have to apologize that I didn't do the questionnaire, but I did recently just graduate. So I recently had, a leadership class with a similar questionnaire. And I I tend to got the collaborating, but I also tend to like avoid issues as well, as ironic as that sounds. So I definitely know that I need to work on addressing issues as they arise and not letting them become bigger issues before I work to resolve them.
Thank you. Tim?
Well, I too failed to do the questionnaire. But I'd have to think collaborative, it would be my strength. And I know my weakness, and I don't know where it would fall, but wherever patience falls in there, because I get I have so much for so long, and I do think that I have quite a bit. But when it gets going down the road and nothing's getting resolved, I know that I show my frustration. I know that it's like a bad poker face after a certain point, if that makes sense. So that's something I could definitely improve on.
Thank you. I want to take the time again to thank you all from taking time from your busy schedule and helping us out. Michael, was there anything that you would like to add to this?
No, I have nothing to add. I do appreciate everybody taking time to answer our questions and be involved in this project, though.
Did you all have
You're
any?
very welcome. Glad I could help.
Did you guys have any questions or comments for us?
Nope. Thanks for
Yes.
asking to participate. Enjoyed it.
Thank you, Bob.
I don't have anything either, but yes, thank you for asking for me to participate.
Thank you, April. We definitely appreciate it. And Tim, we definitely appreciate you also. If there is nothing else, I'll say it one more time. Thank you all for participating in this, and I hope you all have a wonderful night. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Mike.
Mike.
See you guys.
Thank you, guys.